For more than 3 decades behind the desk of Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show, Carson did more than interview Hollywood's biggest stars. He also became the keeper of secrets that the entire industry was forced to hide. According to people close to him and longtime colleagues, Carson knew very well that at least 11 guests who appeared frequently on his show were gay, at a time when a single public admission could be enough to destroy a career. Johnny Carson understood that boundary clearly, and he guarded it absolutely. And it was precisely that deliberate silence that allowed many of those secrets to survive for years, never spoken aloud on national television. And below is the list of 11 guests whom Johnny Carson was widely believed to have understood for who they truly were. Names not revealed through words, but through the questions that were never asked on national television. Number 1. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was the ultimate symbol of Hollywood masculinity. Raw, instinctive, and irresistibly magnetic. But to those inside the industry, his private life was far more complex and far harder to categorize. Johnny Carson was widely believed to understand this, just like many powerful figures in Hollywood knew that Brando never confined himself to traditional heterosexual boundaries. That quiet awareness shaped the way Carson interacted with Brando every time he appeared on The Tonight Show. According to former writers and associates, Carson deliberately avoided any questions that might drift into Brando's personal life, especially topics involving romance or marriage. Not because he lacked curiosity, but because he understood that a single misplaced question could shatter the fragile balance Hollywood was trying to maintain. Behind the scenes, rumors of Brando's relationships with men, particularly with James Dean, circulated for years. They became what many described as the secret everyone knew but no one said out loud. That silence was finally broken in 1976, when Brando himself addressed the subject openly in an interview with Playboy, saying, "Like a large number of men, I too have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed." The confession shocked the public, but for Johnny Carson, it was simply a late confirmation of a truth he had understood long before. And it is precisely that contradiction, public surprise versus private knowledge, that makes Marlon Brando one of the most extraordinary figures Hollywood has ever produced. Number 2. Elsa Lanchester. Elsa Lanchester always appeared as an intelligent, unconventional, and sharply individual actress. But to those who truly understood Hollywood behind the scenes, she also represented a rare kind of freedom in the old studio era. When Elsa Lanchester appeared on talk shows, including during the period when American television was dominated by Johnny Carson, Carson was said to be fully aware of the unconventional nature of her personal life and marriage. According to people who worked on the show, Carson consistently and deliberately avoided questions about her romantic life. He never pressed her about her marriage to Charles Lawton, nor did he steer the conversation toward anything that might touch on sexual orientation, not because he lacked curiosity, but because he understood that this was a line not meant to be crossed. Within British and American artistic circles, Elsa Lanchester had long been known for her close and emotionally intimate relationships with women, something she never denied in private conversations. That truth was eventually confirmed openly by Elsa herself in her memoir Elsa Lanchester Herself, published in 1983, where she candidly acknowledged that she was bisexual, that she had been romantically involved with women, and that she never believed it was something that needed to be hidden. The admission caused no scandal. It came late, after her career had already closed, but it illuminated the full reality of who Elsa Lanchester truly was. A woman who lived honestly with her emotions in an era when most artists were forced into silence. And for Johnny Carson, Elsa was never a secret to be exposed. She was a personality to be respected, where silence was not meant to conceal, but to preserve dignity. Number 3. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was the embodiment of America's ideal romantic leading man. Tall, elegant, effortlessly charming, he was presented to the public as the very definition of heterosexual masculinity. He appeared multiple times on The Tonight Show, sitting comfortably across from Johnny Carson, speaking about fame, success, and a carefully curated personal life. But behind the studio lights, Carson was said to know a truth that could never be spoken on television. According to those close to the show, Johnny Carson understood that Rock Hudson was gay, and that the life the audience admired, including his marriage, was the result of a meticulously constructed arrangement by Hollywood. It was designed to protect his career in an era when exposure could mean instant destruction. Because of that, Carson maintained a strict boundary during their interviews. Not a single question was allowed to drift too close to Hudson's private life. One misstep, one poorly chosen line, and the entire life Hudson had spent years building could have collapsed live on national television. That silence lasted for decades. Then, in 1985, Rock Hudson became the first major Hollywood star to publicly reveal that he was dying of AIDS. The announcement sent shockwaves across America and quietly confirmed what the film industry had worked so hard to conceal for so long. It was not just the revelation of an illness, it was the unspoken truth finally stepping into the light, after a lifetime spent protecting an image that could never fully reflect the man behind it. Number 4. Liberace. When Liberace stepped onto the stage of The Tonight Show, he felt like someone who didn't belong to any mold America had at the time. Fur coats, diamond rings, soft gestures, and a theatrical flair so extravagant it seemed to challenge every standard of masculinity on national television. The more over-the-top his public image became, the more absolute his denials were. In the guest chair across from Johnny Carson, that truth was never spoken aloud. Carson was widely believed to know exactly who Liberace was, just like everyone else in the entertainment industry. But instead of asking questions, he chose a different approach. He turned Liberace into safe entertainment. He joked about the extravagance, praised the costumes, invited him to play the piano, and smoothly shifted the conversation whenever it drifted too close to anything personal. That silence was not accidental. It was an unspoken agreement. Liberace needed The Tonight Show to remain acceptable to the family audiences of Middle America. Carson understood that one wrong question could cause the entire carefully built image to collapse live on television. It was not until after Liberace's death in 1987 that the curtain was finally pulled back. Scott Thorson, his longtime partner, confirmed their relationship in the memoir Behind the Candelabra in 1988. The book described a life constructed through deliberate concealment. And only in hindsight did audiences fully understand what Johnny Carson had known all along. On The Tonight Show, Liberace was never revealed through words. He was protected by the questions that were never asked, becoming one of the openly hidden gay guests Carson welcomed in silence. Number 5. Mart Crowley. Mart Crowley did not step onto The Tonight Show as an entertainer, but as a signal that Hollywood was brushing up against a new and uneasy boundary. As the playwright behind The Boys in the Band, Crowley represented something almost unheard of on American television at the time. His work was one of the first in U.S. theater to portray gay men openly, directly, without apology, and without disguise. In an era when America was still deeply cautious, even fearful, he stood for an emerging LGBTQ+ voice willing to exist in public. Johnny Carson was widely believed to understand just how sensitive that presence was. Inviting Crowley onto the show was not a casual booking. It was a carefully weighed decision, made at a time when late-night television still answered to conservative audiences and nervous network executives. According to people who worked on the program, Carson deliberately shaped the conversation around art and theater. He steered it toward creative process and cultural impact, while carefully avoiding deeper discussions of gay life or identity politics. Not out of disrespect, but because he understood the stakes. One sentence pushed too far could have turned the appearance into a nationwide backlash. For Mart Crowley, The Tonight Show was not a platform to persuade America to change overnight. It was something quieter, and in many ways, more significant. It was one of the first moments when American television acknowledged the existence of an openly gay voice at all, even if that acknowledgement was wrapped in caution and control. And that is what made Crowley a singular figure in the show's history. Not because of what he said on air, but because of what Johnny Carson consciously chose not to let him say. Number 6. Barbara Stanwyck. During the years when Johnny Carson ruled late-night television, Barbara Stanwyck appeared on American talk shows as exactly what she was, a living legend, serious, sharp, and emotionally guarded. She was never an easy guest to approach. On The Tonight Show, Stanwyck sat across from Carson with complete composure, speaking about her career, her discipline as an actress, and decades of relentless work in Hollywood. But according to people who worked behind the scenes, Carson was well aware that Stanwyck's private life was off-limits. Her deeply close relationships with women in the arts, especially with Marion Morgan, her longtime companion, were understood quietly within the industry. Because of that, Carson carefully steered every conversation. He kept his questions firmly within safe territory. On national television, he never asked why Stanwyck never remarried, and he never touched the rumors that had followed her for years. According to former writers on the show, this was not avoidance driven by fear. It was an unspoken form of respect for a woman who had chosen, on her own terms, how she would exist in Hollywood. Stanwyck was not treated as a mystery to be exposed. She was treated as an icon whose boundaries were to be honored. And in that silence, Johnny Carson made it clear that sometimes the most powerful gesture on television is knowing exactly which questions should never be asked. Number 7. Truman Capote. Among all the guests who appeared on The Tonight Show, Truman Capote was a rare case. He was one of the very few figures from old Hollywood who was openly gay and made no effort to soften, disguise, or repackage himself for mainstream television. Every time Capote sat across from Johnny Carson, he arrived with the same sharp, ironic, razor-edged intelligence. It was the complete opposite of the safe kind of guest. That was exactly what made Capote dangerous, at least in Carson's eyes. Not because of scandal, but because Capote had a habit of saying things out loud that television was simply not ready to hear. He spoke with precision, with wit, and with very little concern for whether his honesty might make people uncomfortable. On live television, Carson usually let Capote talk, but he watched the clock closely. He knew when to step in, when to redirect the conversation, when to soften a sharp remark with a joke or a quick change of subject. It was careful timing, not censorship. With Capote, Carson was not protecting a secret. He was managing a force. Truman Capote did not need to be shielded by silence. Instead, he forced the most powerful host in American television to actively control the rhythm of the conversation, simply to keep the show from crossing lines that the medium itself could not yet afford to cross. Number 8. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead was one of the most reckless, daring, and unpredictable guests ever to appear on The Tonight Show. She came on stage with unmistakable swagger, that deep, gravelly voice, and an attitude that made it clear she had no interest in fitting into the rules of family-friendly American television. Within artistic circles, Bankhead's bisexuality was never really a secret. She openly loved both men and women in private conversations and carried herself as if that were the most natural thing in the world, even though she never made an official public declaration. That kind of honesty was rare for her time, and it placed her in a category few others dared to occupy. That openness was exactly what made Johnny Carson both fascinated and cautious. On air, Carson often let Bankhead talk at length. He knew her wit, sharp tongue, and fearless energy could produce unforgettable television. At the same time, he stayed alert. Whenever her stories or remarks edged too close to territory American television was not yet ready to accept, Carson would subtly cut the rhythm, change the subject, or bring the moment to a close. With Tallulah Bankhead, The Tonight Show was not a place where she hid who she was. It was a stage where the truth was allowed to exist, as long as it was never spelled out too clearly. Number 9. Paul Lynde. Throughout his many appearances on The Tonight Show, Paul Lynde became so familiar to audiences that he felt almost like a permanent fixture of American television. With his unmistakably high-pitched voice, razor-sharp sarcasm, and unmistakable camp sensibility, Lynde embodied a strange contradiction. Adult viewers could easily recognize that he was gay, while mainstream television continued to politely pretend it saw nothing at all. Inside Hollywood, it was one of those truths everyone knew and no one was allowed to say. Lynde's public image was tightly bound to family-friendly shows like Hollywood Squares, and any open discussion of his personal life could have ended that career overnight. Johnny Carson was well aware of how fragile that balance was. Each time Lynde sat in the guest chair, Carson made a deliberate choice to protect him through silence. There were no questions about marriage, no hints about romantic life, no invitations to explain who he was off camera. The conversation stayed safely focused on comedy and work. This was not accidental avoidance. It was a conscious decision, one meant to keep Paul Lynde viable on national television. Lynde never publicly acknowledged his sexuality during his lifetime. Only after his death did friends and historians confirm what Hollywood had known for decades. Looking back now, it becomes clear that Paul Lynde was not hidden by television. He was preserved inside a carefully maintained silence, one that Johnny Carson helped uphold, so that a brilliant comic could continue making America laugh, even if he was never allowed to be fully himself on air. Number 10. Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol walked onto The Tonight Show as someone who seemed completely out of sync with everything late-night television was built to be. A towering figure of pop art and openly gay at a time when that was still rare on national TV, Warhol brought with him a presence that felt cold, distant, and deliberately strange. It made the conversation uncomfortable in a way viewers were not used to. Unlike typical guests who understood the rhythm of a talk show, telling stories, trading jokes, and building momentum, Warhol did the opposite. His answers were short, sometimes nearly empty, as if he were quietly refusing to play along with the unspoken rules of television. Long silences stretched on. Johnny Carson, famous for controlling the flow of his show with perfect timing, was forced to smile through the gaps and scramble to fill the air. Television critics later noted that this was one of the rare moments when Carson seemed to lose command of the conversation itself. Even so, Carson continued to invite Warhol back, not because Warhol was easy to manage, but because his cultural influence was too large to ignore. To shut him out would have made The Tonight Show feel disconnected from a new generation that was reshaping art, identity, and celebrity. In his memoir Popism, published in 1980, Warhol admitted that he preferred observing people to talking to them, and that he believed silence could be a performance in itself. That idea explains his behavior on Carson's stage. Warhol made no effort to charm the audience, and he never offered his sexuality as something for television to dissect. He simply existed as he was. For Andy Warhol, late-night television was not a place for entertainment. It became a quiet collision between mass media and contemporary art. Johnny Carson was forced to adapt to a guest who did not want to be understood, did not want to be guided, and had no interest in becoming part of the show he was sitting on. Number 11. Doris Day. Doris Day was the perfect embodiment of the American woman Hollywood spent decades creating. She was wholesome, optimistic, gentle, and completely safe for family audiences. On The Tonight Show, she appeared exactly as viewers expected, smiling warmly, speaking about her music, her films, and a career built on romance and sunshine, while her private life remained at a carefully protected distance. Those who worked behind the scenes believe Johnny Carson understood very well that Doris Day's public image did not reflect the full truth of her life. According to former staff, Carson never asked questions that dug into her marriages or her emotional world. It was not because he lacked curiosity. It was because he knew Doris Day was one of the most tightly guarded stars in Hollywood history. Only later, after she withdrew from show business, did the public begin to understand what had been hidden. Her life was shaped by control, manipulation, emotional damage, and marriages managed by others rather than chosen freely. But during the years she sat across from Johnny Carson, Doris Day was not a mystery to be exposed. She was an image that needed to be preserved. That carefully maintained silence allowed her to survive as the last great symbol of classic Hollywood purity. The cost was high. The real woman behind the smile was never allowed to appear on national television.